The sound of the ambulance pierced the morning silence of Beverly Hills like a sharp blade cutting through silk. It was a Tuesday in February, and the sun was already beating down on the mirrored windows of the Johnson mansion when everything began to crumble. Miss Irma Smith, 62 years old and 25 years dedicated to that house, was finishing up the laundry in the backyard when she heard the first desperate scream coming from the second floor. "My God! My God! Someone help me!" Camilla Johnson's voice echoed through the marble corridors, blending with the hum of the central air conditioning and the distant noise of traffic on Sunset Boulevard. It was a sound that Irma knew well, the despair of a mother facing the uncontrollable. Irma immediately dropped the sheet she was folding, her hands calloused from decades of work trembling slightly. She climbed the service stairs with the agility of someone who knew each step by heart, every creak of the imported wood. Upon reaching the second-floor hall, she was met with a scene that made her take a deep breath and whisper a prayer she had learned from her grandmother in the countryside of Kentucky. The baby, Nicholas Edward, only 3 weeks old, was as pale as paper in the mahogany crib, his tiny bluish lips contrasting with the immaculate white of his Egyptian cotton onesie. Camilla, still wearing the silk robe she had used for breakfast, held her son against her chest, her tears dripping onto the hand-embroidered blanket that had cost more than Irma's annual salary. "Miss Irma?" Camilla turned to see her, her green eyes, a legacy from her Italian adoptive family, overflowing with panic. "He's not responding. I can't wake him up. I tried to feed him. I tried to comfort him. But he is... Calm down, my daughter." Irma approached slowly, her voice carrying the serene calmness of the countryside. She was of medium height, with grey hair always pulled back in a neat bun, skin marked by the sun, and brown eyes that had seen enough of life not to be easily shaken. "Let me see the baby." At that moment, Rosa Green, the 58-year-old Spanish housekeeper, burst into the room carrying her cell phone. Tall and slender, always impeccably dressed in her navy blue uniform, Rosa had an angular face and her black hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. Her small, piercing eyes scanned the scene with military efficiency. "I've already called Dr. Henry and the paramedics," she announced in her heavily accented English. "They'll be here in 15 minutes at most. Miss Camilla, please sit down. You look very pale." Irma observed the baby closely, her experienced eyes catching details that others might overlook. The irregular breathing, the slightly greyish tone of the skin, the way the tiny fists were clenched. These were signs that reminded her of distant nights in the countryside of Kentucky, when she was called urgently to humble homes, where babies arrived needing special help to embrace life. "Rosa, let me stay here until the doctors arrive," Irma said, her voice low but firm. "You can prepare some chamomile tea for Miss Camilla. She needs to calm down." Rosa hesitated, her rigid principles of family hierarchy clashing with the emergency situation. "I'm not sure if that's appropriate. Mr. Edward has always made it clear that—" "What does it matter, Rosa?" Camilla's voice cut through the air like a whip. "What does my husband think now? My son might be... She couldn't finish the sentence. The baby let out a weak, almost inaudible whimper that made Camilla hold him even tighter against her chest. Irma, driven by a maternal instinct that 25 years of domestic work had never managed to suppress, extended her arms. "Let me hold him for a little while, my daughter. You are nervous, and babies sense our energy." Reluctantly, Camilla transferred Nicholas to Irma's arms. The moment the caregiver from Kentucky held the child, something changed in the atmosphere. It was as if decades of silent experience finally found their purpose. Irma rocked the baby with precise movements, whispering words in a dialect from the countryside that even she didn't know where it came from. "What are you doing?" Rosa asked suspiciously. "It's just a lullaby my grandmother used to sing," Irma replied, keeping her eyes on the baby. "It calmed the children back home." The sound of sirens approached, blending with the morning noise of Beverly Hills. Through the panoramic window of the room, the Hollywood sign watched the scene from afar, arms open over a city that mixed opulence and despair in proportions only Los Angeles could create. When the paramedics finally arrived, followed by Dr. Henry Foster, a tall man, with grey hair and gold-rimmed glasses, who had been attending the family for 15 years, Irma stepped back to her usual place, the back of the room, invisible but attentive to everything. "We're taking him to Beverly Hills Hospital," announced the doctor after a quick examination. "I need a full team to assess what's happening." As Camilla hurriedly gathered the baby's documents and Rosa organized a bag with clothes, Irma remained by the window, watching the commotion. Deep in her chest, a familiar unease began to grow, the same feeling she had so often in the countryside when she knew conventional medicine would not be enough. She looked one last time at the empty crib before heading down to the kitchen. In the coming hours, as the family faced tests and diagnoses, Irma would do what she always did: take care of the house, prepare food that perhaps no one would eat, and quietly pray for everything to turn out well. But deep in her heart, an ancient voice. It whispered that this would only be the beginning of a journey that would test not only the life of little Nicholas, but also the secrets she had carried for over 2 decades. The first drops of summer rain began to hit the windows of the mansion when the ambulance finally disappeared into the afternoon traffic of Beverly Hills. 3 days had passed since little Nicholas was admitted to Beverly Hills Hospital, and the Johnson mansion was filled with a suffocating tension. Irma woke up before dawn, as she always did. But this time it wasn't the routine that got her out of bed. It was the muffled screams coming from the couple's bedroom on the 2nd floor. 17 specialists, Edward, 17! Camilla's voice echoed through the halls, laden with a hysteria that grew with each passing hour. Neurologists, pediatricians, cardiologists, and none of them can explain what's happening to my son, Edward Johnson. A congressman and heir to one of the most influential families in the state paced back and forth in his office. He was an imposing man, 45 years old, with slicked-back black hair styled with imported gel, always wearing tailored suits that cost more than a modest car. His square jaw and small, calculating eyes reflected the coldness that made him feared in the halls of Washington, D.C. "Camilla, you need to calm down," he said, adjusting the cuffs of his Italian shirt. "The press is already sniffing around that something is wrong. Yesterday, 3 journalists approached me at the hospital entrance. If it leaks that our son is hospitalized in serious condition—" "Serious condition?" Camilla interrupted, her green eyes blazing. "He's practically in a coma, Edward. The doctors use fancy words, but I see it in their eyes. They don't know what to do." Irma, who was discreetly bringing up morning coffee on a silver tray, paused in the hallway to listen. She had learned over the years that the most important information always came from conversations that were not meant for her ears. "Dr. Henry mentioned yesterday the possibility of transferring him to Chicago," Edward continued, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial tone. "Northwestern Memorial Hospital has a more advanced neonatal ICU, but that would mean publicly admitting that Beverly Hills medicine couldn't solve it." "Publicly?" Camilla laughed bitterly. "Are you still thinking about the elections? Our son could die, Edward." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of Edward's phone. He answered with the automatic efficiency of someone who lives by the phone. "Hello? Yes, Dr. Henry. What do you mean, no response to any protocol?" The congressman's voice lost some of its composure. "But they've already tried. I understand. Yes, we'll be there in an hour." When he hung up, Edward turned to Camilla with an expression that Irma even without seeing him recognized by the tone of his voice, barely concealed desperation disguised as authority. "They want an emergency meeting. The entire medical team at 9 o'clock. Irma quietly descended to the kitchen, where she found Rosa organizing the medicine cabinet obsessively. The meticulous Spanish housekeeper was now bordering on compulsive, reorganizing medicine bottles in alphabetical order for the third time in 2 days. "Rosa, you haven't even had coffee yet," Irma observed, pouring fresh coffee into a porcelain cup. "I have no appetite." Rosa did not look up. "In 22 years working for wealthy families, I've never seen anything like this. The doctors, they're lost, Irma, completely lost." "And what exactly are they saying?" Rosa hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Yesterday I overheard Dr. Henry talking to a colleague on the phone. He said that all conventional therapies have failed. He mentioned unexplained neurological condition and possible unidentified rare genetic syndrome." Irma served herself. Coffee, her hands trembling imperceptibly. In the back of her mind, old memories stirred like dry leaves in the wind. Her grandmother Raimunda blessing children who were born asleep. The smell of lavender burning in the yard. The old healer's hands massaging tiny bellies until the babies came back to life. "Rosa," she said, choosing her words carefully, "do you think that, if it were necessary, they would listen to someone who isn't a doctor?" The housekeeper finally looked at her, frowning. "What are you talking about? It's just that, in the countryside, sometimes—" Irma paused, feeling the weight of 25 years of silence on her shoulders. "Sometimes children are born like this, a bit disconnected from the world. And the healers, they have ways of—" "Irma," Rosa interrupted, horrified. "You can't be thinking of— That would be illegal medicine. You could be arrested." The kitchen phone rang, interrupting the conversation. Rosa answered with her usual formality, but her expression quickly changed. "Yes, Dr. Henry. I understand. I will inform them immediately." When she hung up, Rosa was pale. "They want the family to go to the hospital now. The baby's condition worsened overnight." At that moment, Edward came down to the kitchen, already wearing a black suit that made him look like he was going to a funeral. His face was tense, and for the first time in years, Irma saw genuine fear in his eyes. "Rosa, prepare the car. Camilla is not in a condition to drive." He turned to Irma. "You stay here. If anyone from the press shows up, you know nothing about the baby. Understood?" "Yes, sir." After they left, leaving the mansion in heavy silence, Irma went up to the baby's room. The mahogany crib was still there, empty, surrounded by expensive gifts that would never be used. A musical mobile from France, cashmere blankets, designer clothes that cost more than the minimum wage. She approached the window and looked out at the backyard, where James, the groundskeeper from Florida, was watering the ornamental plants. He was a tall, thin man, with dark skin marked by the sun, his grey hair always hidden under a faded cap. He had worked there for 15 years but spoke little, only what was essential. For the first time in decades, Irma allowed herself to remember clearly, her grandmother's hands teaching her, feeling the pulse of the sleeping children, the recipe for fennel tea with cloves that made babies latch back on, the prayer whispered in ancient Tupi that she had memorized at 12. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 25 years, prayed not to remain invisible, but to have the courage to be seen. Outside, the sun of Beverly Hills shone brightly, illuminating a city that never slept, never stopped, never doubted that there would always be a solution for everything. But in the silence of that empty room, Irma knew that some answers came from places that the big city had forgotten to search. Camilla's call came at 3 in the afternoon, just as Irma was finishing preparing the corn pudding for the St. Joseph's celebration she always discreetly organized in the kitchen. It was March 19th, and even working in a house where Catholic traditions were limited to Sunday Mass at the mall, she maintained the customs learned in the countryside. "Irma?" Camilla's voice sounded distant, muffled by the noise of the hospital. "I need you to do something for me." "Yes, my daughter. What do you need?" "Go into Edward's office and get some documents for me. They're in the right drawer of the desk, in a red folder. I need Nicholas's health insurance receipts." Irma hesitated. Edward's office was off limits. She only entered there for cleaning, always under Rosa's supervision. "Are you sure? Mr. Edward won't—" "Irma, my son could die," Camilla's voice broke. "The doctors are talking about transferring him to Chicago today. Please." 10 minutes later, Irma found herself standing before the imposing mahogany door of the office. The environment was the embodiment of Edward's power, walls lined with leather-bound law books, gold-framed diplomas, a rosewood desk that had belonged to his grandfather, the founder of the family empire. The smell of leather and polished wood mingled with the expensive perfume Edward wore. The right drawer was locked. Irma searched for the key in obvious places, under the mat, inside the crystal pencil holder, until she found it taped to the bottom of the central drawer. The red folder was exactly where Camilla said it would be, but upon opening it, Irma discovered it contained more than just health insurance documents. There were also bank contracts, loan statements, and a series of collection letters from banks she recognized by their logos. Even with her limited education, she had stopped studying at 11 to help her family. Irma could understand numbers, and the numbers she saw left her cold. Debts in the tens of millions of dollars, mortgages on properties, tax foreclosure notices. The Johnson family was apparently on the brink of bankruptcy. "My God," she whispered, flipping through documents revealing loans taken to finance political campaigns, investments in failed businesses, exorbitant spending on jewelry and international travel. The mansion, she discovered, was mortgaged 3 times. One letter in particular caught her attention. It was from the central bank, dated the previous week, notifying about irregularities in offshore accounts. The language was technical, but the message was clear. Edward was being investigated for money laundering. Irma quickly photographed the health insurance receipts with the simple cell phone she had received as a Christmas gift, then closed everything and put the key back in its place. But as she stood up, she noticed something that made her stop. A small cough coming from the baby monitor on the shelf. The monitor was on, transmitting sounds from the empty room. But what she heard was not the normal noise of the device. It was a weak cough, almost a whisper coming from upstairs. She rushed up to the baby's room, expecting to find it empty as always. To her surprise, there was someone there, Grandma Francesca, Edward's mother. She was a 78-year-old Italian, small and bent with age, with snow-white hair always tied in a low bun. She eternally wore black clothes, a perpetual mourning for her husband who had died 20 years ago, and held in her hands a pearl rosary that had belonged to her own mother. "Grandma Francesca," Irma approached cautiously. The old lady rarely left the annex where she lived at the back of the property. "My dear Irma," Francesca said in her heavily accented Portuguese, not taking her eyes off the empty crib. "I feel it. I feel the baby." "What do you mean, Ma'am?" Francesca slowly turned, her faded blue eyes still piercing as they fixed on Irma. "You don't understand. The little one, he is calling, I hear." Irma felt a chill run down her spine. In the countryside there were stories about people who could hear the calls of those caught between life and death. Her own grandmother claimed to have that gift. "Grandma, you shouldn't be here if Mr. Edward finds out." "Edward?" Francesca shook her head in disdain. "My son has forgotten the family. He has forgotten where he came from. My grandmother in Sicily, she healed babies with herbs and prayers. But here, She made a dismissive gesture with her hands. "Here it is, only medicine. Just medicine." At that moment, Irma's phone rang. It was Rosa calling from the hospital. "Irma, they decided to transfer the baby to Chicago today. But something strange is happening." "What is it?" "Camilla is refusing to sign the authorization. She says she wants to go home first to get something from the baby's room. Mr. Edward is furious." When she hung up, Francesca was smiling faintly. "See, the mother senses. Mothers always sense when the medicine is not enough." "Grandma, do you think that—" Irma hesitated, then decided to open up. "Do you think there are other ways to help a sick child?" The old Italian woman's eyes sparkled. "My grandmother always said, when the doctors cannot, it is because the child's soul is lost. And to find the lost soul, it takes hands that know." "Hands that know?" "Yes, hands of women who have seen life come into the world." Miss Irma felt her heart race. Francesca knew. Somehow the old Italian sensed her past as a midwife. At that moment, the unmistakable sound of Edward's car echoed in the garage. Francesca held Miss Irma's arm with surprising strength for her age. "When the time comes," she whispered, "you cannot be afraid. The baby needs you, and the family. The family needs to remember who we truly are." Miss Irma quickly descended, leaving Francesca alone in the room. In the kitchen, she finished preparing the corn pudding, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The documents she had seen, Francesca's intuition, the baby's desperate state, everything seemed to converge on an impending moment of decision. When Edward entered the kitchen, he found Miss Irma stirring the corn pudding, the sweet aroma of cloves and fennel filling the air. "What is that smell?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Corn pudding, sir, a tradition from my homeland." Edward looked at her for a moment, as if seeing her for the first time in years. His eyes were red from exhaustion, and for the first time, Miss Irma saw not a powerful congressman, but just a desperate father. "Miss Irma," he finally said, "you have children, don't you?" "6, sir." "And has any of them ever been sick? Like, seriously sick?" Miss Irma stopped stirring the corn pudding and looked him in the eyes. "Yes, sir. My youngest nearly died at 3 months. The doctors at the health clinic said there was nothing more to be done." "And what did you do?" The question hung in the air, heavy with possibilities. The silence in the kitchen stretched like a rope about to snap. Edward stood in the doorway, still in his wrinkled suit, waiting for an answer that Miss Irma knew could change everything. She turned off the heat under the pot of corn pudding, her trembling hands holding the wooden spoon. "I did what my grandma taught me," she finally replied, her voice low but firm. "And my son lived." Before Edward could respond, Camilla rushed in through the back door, still wearing her hospital clothes, a wrinkled white blouse and jeans she had worn for the last 3 days. Her blonde hair was disheveled, her eyes swollen from crying. "Edward, they want to take Nicholas now. They said every minute that passes." She stopped as she caught the scent of the corn pudding, a strange expression crossing her face. "That smell. I know that smell." Miss Irma watched Camilla's reaction closely. It was something she had learned over the years. The aromas of childhood always returned in moments of great vulnerability. "It's corn pudding, Miss Camilla. My grandma used to say that the smell calmed children who were born restless." "Restless?" Camilla approached the stove as if hypnotized. My biological mother used to do something like that. I vaguely remember. Before I was adopted." Edward frowned. In 15 years of marriage, Camilla rarely mentioned her humble origins in Mississippi. She had been adopted at 2 by a wealthy Italian family from South Dakota, and since then had completely reinvented her story. "Camilla, we don't have time for nostalgia," he said impatiently. "The helicopter is waiting to take Nicholas to Chicago." "No, The word came out of Camilla's mouth with a firmness that surprised everyone, including herself. "I won't let him go." "What?" Edward stepped forward, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in the halls of Congress. "Camilla, you are being irrational. The doctors said—" "The doctors don't know anything." Camilla exploded, her words echoing off the tiled walls. 3 days, Edward. 3 days of tests, CT scans, MRIs, and they can't even tell me what is wrong with my son. Rosa, who had just returned from the hospital, witnessed the scene from the kitchen door. Her meticulous eyes caught every detail: the tension between the couple, the steaming pot of corn pudding, Ms. Irma standing between them as if deciding something important. "Ms. Camilla is right," Rosa said, surprising everyone. "Today I heard Dr. Henry talking with a colleague from Chicago. He said that the case challenges all known protocols." Edward turned to Rosa, incredulous. "Are you suggesting we shouldn't trust medicine?" "I'm saying that maybe it's time to admit that medicine alone is not enough." At that moment the house phone rang. Rosa answered with her usual efficiency, but her expression quickly changed to one of concern. "It was the hospital," she announced after hanging up. "Dr. Henry wants to speak with you urgently. He said that the situation has stabilized in the last 2 hours. "Stabilized?" Camilla clung to the kitchen island. "What do you mean, stabilized?" "He didn't give details. Just said to go to the hospital immediately." Edward was already heading for the door, but Camilla didn't move. She continued to stare at the pot of corn pudding, as if searching for something in the distant memories of her childhood in Mississippi. "Ms. Irma," she suddenly said, "do you know other ways to care for sick babies?" The question made the air in the kitchen even denser. Ms. Irma felt the weight of everyone's gazes upon her, Edward impatient, Rosa curious, Camilla desperately hopeful. "Miss Camilla, Ms. Irma took a deep breath, making a decision that carried the weight of 25 years of silence. "In the countryside of Kentucky, where I was born, sometimes children came into the world a bit disconnected, as if their souls hadn't yet decided to stay." "And what did you do?" Camilla's voice was a whisper. "My grandma was a midwife and a folk healer. She said that when medicine couldn't help, it was because the child needed to be called back in a different way, with massages, herbs, prayers." "That's superstition!" Edward exploded. "Camilla, you can't be considering—" "Why not?" The voice came from the kitchen door. It was Francesca, who had come down from the baby's room. The old Italian. He leaned on his carved wooden cane, his blue eyes fixed on his son. "In Sicily, my grandma cured children that doctors couldn't save." "Mom, please!" Edward massaged his temples. "You're talking about medieval practices." "And modern medicine is saving my grandson," Francis retorted sharply. 3 days, Edward, 3 days and nothing." Rosa, who had remained silent, suddenly spoke up. "If I may give my opinion, in my town in Spain, my grandma always said that when doctors don't know what else to do, it's because the problem isn't just physical." Edward looked at the 4 women surrounding him, his mother, his wife, the groundskeeper and the caregiver, and saw the same determination in all their faces. It was an improvised but powerful coalition. "This is madness," he murmured in Spanish, running his hands through his hair. "You want me to risk my son's life on witchcraft?" "It's not witchcraft," said Irma, her voice gaining a strength she didn't know she possessed. "It's knowledge. Knowledge that has been passed from mother to daughter for centuries, before hospitals existed, before pharmacy medicine existed." The phone rang again. This time it was Camilla who answered. "Hello? Yes, Dr. Henry, what? What do you mean? Unexplained improvement?" Her voice rose an octave. "His vital signs are more stable." "But how?" "I understand. Yes, we're on our way now." When she hung up, everyone in the kitchen was looking at her. Nicholas, He's responding better. The doctor doesn't understand why, but his saturation has improved and he's less apathetic." A heavy silence settled in the kitchen. Irma looked at the pot of corn pudding, still warm, the sweet aroma of cloves and anise permeating the air. She knew it wasn't a coincidence. There was something in the scent of the spices that calmed children, something her grandma had taught her, but she had never questioned. "Let's go to the hospital," Edward finally said. "But that doesn't change anything. Science is science." As they prepared to leave, Irma put the corn pudding in the refrigerator, but before closing the pot, she set aside a little of the sweet in a small jar. Instinctively, she knew it would be needed later. Outside, summer clouds began to form over Beverly Hills, heralding the afternoon rain that would wash the city's warm streets. But inside the Mendoza home, something deeper was being washed away, the absolute certainties about what was possible and impossible when it came to saving a life. Beverly Hills Hospital at 6 in the evening was a hive of activity. On-call doctors crossed the polished corridors, the smell of disinfectant mingling with the aroma of coffee wafting from the vending machines, and the constant buzzing of machines created a mechanical symphony of modern life. Edward walked ahead of the family group, his footsteps echoing against the imported marble floor, while Camilla firmly held the jar of corn pudding that Irma had prepared. "I don't understand why you brought this," Edward murmured for the third time since they left home. "Because the smell calms," Camilla replied, surprising herself with her own conviction. "I can't explain it, but I remember." Dr. Henry was waiting for them in the neonatal ICU meeting room, accompanied by 2 other doctors Edward didn't recognize. The pediatrician looked exhausted, his glasses fogged and his lab coat wrinkled, betraying long hours on duty. "Mendoza family," he greeted, gesturing for them to sit around the light wood oval table. "I want to introduce you to Dr. Robert Caldwell, pediatric neurologist from Chicago, and Dr. Marina Oliver, geneticist from the National Institute of Women's Health." Edward shook the hands of his colleagues with the automatic firmness of someone who lives in politics, but Camilla could barely concentrate on the greetings. Her eyes were fixed on the folder of tests that Dr. Henry nervously handled. "Doctor, you said there was improvement," she said, getting straight to the point. "Yes, and that's exactly what intrigues us." Dr. Henry opened the folder, revealing a series of graphs and tests. "In the last 6 hours, Nicholas has shown stabilization of vital signs that, frankly, we can't explain." Dr. Robert, a short, bald man in his 50s, adjusted his glasses and spoke. "I reviewed all the tests. The neurological pattern remains atypical, but there are signs that the central nervous system is responding better to stimuli." "And what does that mean in plain English?" Edward leaned forward. "It means," said Dr. Marina, a middle-aged black woman with her hair in a professional bun, "that your son is fighting, but we still don't know what against." Camilla opened the jar of corn pudding, and the sweet aroma of cloves and anise spread through the air-conditioned room. To her surprise, Dr. Robert stopped, speaking, and frowned. "What is that smell?" he asked. "Corn pudding, a recipe from our caregiver." Camilla hesitated. "I know it might sound strange, but—" "Cloves and anise." Dr. Robert leaned back in his chair, a nostalgic smile crossing his face. "My grandma in rural Florida made exactly that when I was a child and got sick." The silence in the room was broken by Dr. Henry. "Robert, you can't be suggesting that." "I'm not suggesting anything." Dr. Robert raised his hands in defense. "But I studied integrative medicine at Johns Hopkins. There are compounds in spices that have scientifically proven calming properties. The eugenol in cloves, for example, affects the nervous system." Edward and Dr. Henry exchanged skeptical glances, but Dr. Marina seemed interested. "Actually," she said, There are recent studies on how scents can influence neurological development in newborns. Aromatherapy is being tested in neonatal ICUs in Europe. You're talking about smells? Edward couldn't hide his disdain. We're talking about neuroplasticity, Dr. Marina corrected. A baby's brain is extraordinarily adaptable. Specific sensory stimuli can activate neural pathways that medications cannot. At that moment, a nurse entered the room. Dr. Henry, sorry to interrupt, but baby Nicholas is more active. Would you like to take a look? Everyone immediately stood up and followed to the neonatal ICU. Through the transparent glass of the hospital crib, they could see Nicholas weakly moving his little arms, his small eyes half closed, but no longer completely apathetic. It's the first time in 3 days that he moves spontaneously, the nurse murmured. Camilla pressed her hands against the glass, tears streaming down her face. Can I go in? For a few minutes, Dr. Henry granted. Inside the ICU, Camilla approached her son and instinctively opened the jar of corn pudding again. The baby, slightly, turned his head towards the aroma, a subtle but undeniable movement. He's responding, she whispered. Dr. Robert, who had entered right behind, watched the scene with professional attention. The sense of smell is the most primitive sense, he said to Edward, who remained outside. It's the first to develop and often the last to disappear. Doctor, Edward lowered his voice, do you really think this could have any effect? Dr. Robert sighed. Edward, in 25 years of medicine, I've seen cases that science cannot fully explain. I'm not suggesting we abandon medical protocols, but perhaps it's time to consider complementary approaches. Like what? Therapeutic massage, for example, controlled sensory stimulation, and yes, even aromatherapy with natural substances. Dr. Robert looked directly into Edward's eyes. Your caregiver, does she have experience with babies? She raised 6 children. And did any of them have similar issues? Edward hesitated, recalling the conversation in the kitchen. She mentioned that yes. At that moment, Camilla exited the ICU, firmly holding the empty jar of corn pudding. He smelled everything, she said, her voice heavy with emotion. And when it was over, he cried. It was a soft cry, but he cried. Dr. Henry frowned. Cried? Well, for the first time in 3 days, confirmed the nurse who had witnessed the scene. A heavy silence settled over the group. Dr. Robert was the first to speak up. Johnson family, you need to make a decision. We can continue only with conventional medicine, or we can try an integrative approach. What does that mean exactly? Edward asked. It means that, in addition to medications and monitoring, we would allow safe complementary practices to be applied. Massages, aromatherapy, even the presence of people the baby recognizes by smell or voice. Dr. Marina added, there are hospitals in Denmark and the Netherlands where grandmas and caregivers work alongside the medical team in complex cases like this. Edward looked at Camilla, who held the empty jar as if it were an amulet. Outside the hospital windows, the sun began to set over Central Park, painting the sky in orange hues that reflected on the calm waters. How much time would you give for this integrative approach? He finally asked. 48 hours, Dr. Henry replied. If there are no significant improvements, we transfer to Chicago. Camilla didn't wait for Edward to respond. I accept, she said, her voice firm. And I want Miss Smith to participate. Edward looked at her as if she had lost her mind. Camilla, no, Edward. She turned to him, her green eyes shining with a determination he hadn't seen in years. For 3 days, we relied only on medicine. Now, we will also trust in what your own mother called hands that know. The decision was made. In 48 hours, they would know if tradition and science could work together to bring Nicholas back to life. The next morning, Miss Smith woke up at 5 in the morning with a strange feeling in her chest, a mix of anticipation and terror she hadn't felt in decades. She had slept little, tossing and turning in the small bed of the maid's room, thinking of the words Dr. Robert had said the night before when they called home. "We need you at the hospital at 7. Bring whatever you think is necessary." She dressed in her clean uniform, a white blouse and navy skirt she had worn for years, but this time added something she had kept for a long time, a small cloth bag with dried herbs her grandma had given her before she died. Lavender, rue, rosemary, and a mix of leaves she couldn't even name, but that carried the scent of childhood in the countryside. In the kitchen, she prepared breakfast coffee as she always did, but her hands trembled slightly while stirring the scrambled eggs that Edward liked to eat. Rose appeared earlier than usual, her hair already perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Nervous?" asked the Spanish housekeeper, pouring coffee into the French porcelain cups. "What if I can't do it?" Miss Smith stopped stirring the eggs, looking directly at Rose. "It's been 25 years since I've done this, Rose. What if I've forgotten? What if my hands don't know anymore?" Rose approached and lightly touched Miss Smith's arm. It was the first time in all those years that she made such an intimate gesture. "Listen," she said, mixing Portuguese and Spanish as she always did when she was emotional. "My grandma used to say that what is learned with the heart is never forgotten, and you—" Rose hesitated, then continued, "You have motherly hands. You've always had." Edward came down at 6:30, already wearing a sharp grey suit, but his face showed signs of a restless night. He ate the eggs in silence, only gesturing when he wanted more coffee. Camilla appeared a few minutes later, wearing a simple white blouse and jeans, clothes Miss Smith had never seen her wear before, as if she were shedding layers of sophistication for something more essential. "Miss Smith," Camilla said, sitting next to the caregiver at the kitchen table, another unprecedented gesture, "I want you to tell me about your grandma, about how she did it." Miss Smith placed the coffee cup on the table, took a deep breath and began to speak. It was the first time in 25 years that she told those stories. Grandma Ruth was known in 3 towns in Kentucky. When a child was born with problems, or when they became very ill, mothers would walk miles to reach our home. Her hands moved unconsciously, as if shaping memories in the air. She said some children came into the world with their souls a bit loose, as if they hadn't decided to stay. And how did she help them? Camilla's voice was low, respectful. "First," she observed, "a lot. The way the child breathed, the color of their skin, how they moved their little hands." Irma closed her eyes, going back 50 years in time. Then the massages began, very gentle, on the tummy, on the back, on the tiny feet, and always with warm maracuja oil. Edward, who had remained silent, finally spoke up. "And did it work?" Irma opened her eyes and looked directly at him. "My younger brother, Mr. Edward, was born blue and didn't cry. The doctors at the health clinic told my mother to prepare for the worst. Grandma Ruth worked with him for 3 days and 3 nights. On the 4th day, he cried for the first time." "And where is your brother now?" Camilla asked. "He's a doctor in Chicago, a pediatrician." The irony did not go unnoticed by anyone at the table. At 7 o'clock sharp, they arrived at the hospital. Dr. Henry was waiting for them at the reception, accompanied by Dr. Robert and a woman Irma did not know, a black lady in her 60s, with grey hair tied in braids, wearing a hospital gown. "This is Constance Smith," Dr. Robert introduced, "an obstetric nurse for 35 years, specialized in massage techniques for newborns. She will accompany the entire process." Constance greeted Irma with a warm smile. "I'm from Florida," she said. "My grandmother was also a midwife. I know exactly what we're talking about." The neonatal ICU had been reorganized to accommodate the experience. A discreet screen created a more intimate space around Nicholas's crib, and a small side table had been prepared with sterilized vegetable oils, peanut, sunflower, and even a bottle of maracuja oil that Dr. Robert had managed to get from a health food store. "The rules are clear," Dr. Henry explained as everyone donned gowns and masks. "Complete hand hygiene, movements only. Under medical supervision, and any sign of deterioration, we stop immediately." Nicholas was awake when they approached the crib, his little dark eyes moving slowly, following the voices. He seemed more alert than the day before, but still extremely fragile. Irma approached slowly, her hands already warmed by the maracuja oil. For the first time in decades, she was no longer the invisible caregiver. She was a healer being observed by a medical team. The weight of responsibility made her hesitate for a moment. "Excuse me," she said softly, addressing the baby as her grandmother had taught her. "I'm going to help you feel better." She placed her hands gently on Nicholas's tummy, starting soft circular motions clockwise. The baby reacted immediately, not with crying or agitation, but with a visible relaxation of his muscles. Constance watched every movement with professional attention. "The pressure is perfect," she murmured to Dr. Robert, "and look how he's responding." For 20 minutes, Irma worked in silence. She gently massaged the belly, the back, the tiny feet. Occasionally, she whispered words in a rural dialect that even she could not translate. They were prayers that her grandmother had hummed, passed down from generation to generation. "The heart parameters are improving," announced a nurse monitoring the machines. Camilla, who was watching everything from the other side of the glass, pressed her hands against the transparent surface. She could see something changing in her son, a rosier color in his skin, a calmer breath. When Irma finished, Nicholas let out a small sigh and closed his eyes, not in apnea or unconsciousness, but in natural sleep. It was the first time in 4 days that he slept without the assistance of medication. Dr. Robert quickly checked the vital signs. Oxygen saturation has risen to 98%. Heart rate stabilized in a normal pattern for his age. "How is this possible?" Edward whispered. Constance smiled. "Human touch releases oxytocin in both the child and the one touching. It's one of the first healing mechanisms that exist, older than any medicine." Dr. Henry, who had observed everything with scientific skepticism, shook his head slowly. "I will document everything. If this continues to work, we need to seriously study the integration of these techniques." As they left the ICU, Irma felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: pride. Not the silent pride of a well-kept house or a well-prepared dish, but the deep pride of using a gift that God and her grandmother had given her. "How many times a day do you think you should do this?" Dr. Robert asked. 3 times, she replied without hesitation. "In the morning, in the afternoon, and before bed. It's the rhythm that children understand." Camilla approached as they were already in the hallway. "Irma, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me, my dear. That's what I'm here for." But both knew that something had changed forever. Irma was no longer just an employee. She was a healer, and Nicholas, slowly, was returning to the world. 4 weeks had passed since the first day of massages, and the routine of the neonatal ICU at Beverly Hills Hospital had completely transformed. Irma arrived every day at 9 in the morning, always carrying her small bag of herbs and the bottle of maracuja oil that was now sterilized in the hospital's own laboratory. What had started as a desperate experiment had become an unofficial medical protocol that was attracting the attention of professionals from all over the country. Nicholas was visibly growing every day. His dark eyes now followed movements with curiosity. He reacted to the sound of familiar voices, and, more importantly, he had been gaining weight consistently. Dr. Henry, who initially feared for his own career by allowing In the conference room, they could see the hustle and bustle of the afternoon in Beverly Hills. Cars speeding down Sunset Boulevard, pedestrians rushing to avoid the rain that was beginning to fall, life continuing at its frantic pace. But inside, a small, silent revolution was taking place. Ms. Smith looked at her hands, the same hands that had helped bring her 6 children into the world, that had cooked thousands of meals, that had cared for other people's homes for decades. Now these hands were at the center of a battle between tradition and modernity, between what had always been done and what could be done. "I will continue," she finally said, "but if there are problems, you had nothing to do with it." "We will have everything to do with it," Edward replied, surprising himself with his own conviction. "For the first time in a long time, we are on the right side of a fight." Outside, the rain intensified, washing the streets of the city, and in each of their hearts something was also being washed away: prejudices, fears, and the certainty that they knew exactly where science ended and faith began. The summer festival at the Johnson Mansion traditionally took place every year at the end of June, but this time it had a special significance. Nicholas had been home for 2 weeks, healthy and growing normally, and the celebration had turned into a veiled commemoration of his recovery. Miss Smith had spent the entire morning decorating the back porch with colorful flags, paper balloons, and lanterns she had made herself, while the aroma of corn pudding baking in the oven spread throughout the house. Edward watched from the window of his office on the 2nd floor, seeing Ms. Smith hang the last flags with the help of James, the groundskeeper. It was a scene that made him question many things about the life he had built, the woman who had saved his son by organizing a traditional party that he, a powerful politician, had never truly experienced. "It looks beautiful, doesn't it?" Camilla's voice brought him back to the present. She entered the office, carrying Nicholas in her arms, the baby now robust and alert, his curious eyes observing everything around. "It does." Edward turned to his wife, noticing something different about her. In recent weeks, Camilla had gradually abandoned designer clothes and elaborate makeup. Today, she wore a simple cotton blouse and a long floral skirt, looking 10 years younger. "You look different too." "I feel different." Camilla approached the window, gently rocking Nicholas. "Edward, we need to talk." The tone of her voice immediately alerted him. In 15 years of political marriage, he had learned to recognize when a serious conversation was approaching. "It's about what I discovered yesterday," she continued, looking directly into her husband's eyes, "about my real origins." Edward felt his stomach drop. He had hired a private investigator months earlier to track down possible skeletons in the closet of the family, preparing for his next campaign. What he had discovered about Camilla's past had been kept under absolute secrecy. "Rose showed me some documents she had been keeping," Camilla said, her voice calm but determined. "Letters from my biological mother. She didn't die when I was 2, Edward. She's alive, living in a riverside community in Mississippi." The silence stretched between them like a rope about to snap. Nicholas babbled something, oblivious to the growing tension in the room. "Camilla," Edward began, but she interrupted him. "You knew, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Edward sighed, massaging his temples. "The investigator found the information 6 months ago. I didn't know how to tell you." "How do you tell me that my whole life is a lie? That the family that adopted me made up a story about my biological mother dying so I would never look for her? They wanted to protect you. It was a poor family, Camilla. Uneducated riverside dwellers, without what?" Camilla's voice rose an octave, causing Nicholas to stir. "Without money? Without an important last name? Like Miss Smith?" Edward realized where the conversation was heading. "This is different." "Is it?" It's different because Ms. Smith only saved our son. Because she only knows things that 17 specialists didn't. Camilla stepped away from the window, walking around the office with Nicholas in her arms. Edward, I spent 15 years pretending to be someone I'm not, using a different accent, avoiding foods that reminded me of my childhood, denying anything that connected me to the South. And you achieved a better life because of it. I achieved a false life. Camilla stopped abruptly, her green eyes shining with anger. And I almost lost my son because I was so disconnected from myself that I didn't trust what my motherly instinct was screaming. Nicholas began to cry, sensing the tension. Automatically, Camilla started to rock him and softly sing a song that Edward had never heard, a folk tune from the South that she didn't even know she still remembered. Where did that music come from? He asked, genuinely curious. I don't know. It just came out. Camilla looked at their son, who had calmed down immediately. It's like part of me has awakened in the past few weeks. At that moment, Rose appeared at the office door. Excuse me, Ms. Camilla. Your biological mother is on the phone. The silence that followed was so dense that Edward found it hard to breathe. My mother? Camilla's voice was a whisper. Yes, Ma'am. She said that Rose Green wrote to her a few months ago, and that she saw you on television in a report about integrative medicine at Beverly Hills Hospital. Camilla looked at Edward, then at Rose, then at Nicholas. She wants to talk to me? She's waiting on the line, Ma'am. Edward watched his wife leave the office carrying Nicholas, following Rose to the ground floor where the main phone was. He was left alone, looking out the window at the summer festival that was being prepared below. Miss Smith was now lighting the small bonfires they would have for the late afternoon, with James helping her. Dry wood. 15 minutes later, Edward went downstairs to look for Camilla. He found her sitting in the kitchen, still holding Nicholas, with Rose beside her offering a glass of water. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was something different in her expression, a peace he hadn't seen in years. So what happened? He asked, wary of the answer. She never stopped looking for me. Camilla wiped her nose with a tissue. For 28 years she sent letters to the family that adopted me. All were returned as unknown recipient. Camilla? Edward. She's a cook at a community school. She teaches underprivileged children, and she knows folk healing like Ms. Smith. When she saw on TV that I had a son who was healed with traditional massages, Camilla paused, emotional. She said she recognized my face even after all this time. Edward sat heavily in a chair at the kitchen table. His political life had been built on control, predictability, and a carefully cultivated image. Now everything seemed to be slipping through his fingers. What do you want to do? He finally asked. I want to meet her. I want her to meet her grandson. And I want... Camilla hesitated, looking at Nicholas. I want to learn the things she knows, the things I should have learned, but were denied to me. At that moment, Miss Smith entered the kitchen, still wearing the floral apron she had put on to prepare for the celebration. She stopped upon seeing the tension in the room. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You're not interrupting, Camilla said quickly. Miss Smith, can I ask you a personal question? Of course, my dear. Are you proud of who you are? Where you came from? What you know? Miss Smith was silent for a moment, thinking. You know, Miss Camilla, I spent many years feeling ashamed of my accent, my beliefs, the way I learned to care for people. But after I saw Nicholas improve, she smiled shyly. After I saw that what my grandma taught me can still save lives. Yes, I feel proud. I want to feel that pride too, Camilla said, her voice firm. I want my son to grow up knowing all his roots, the rich and the poor, the ones from the south and the ones from the northeast. Edward looked at the woman he had lived with for 15 years and realized he was getting to know her for the first time. And, surprisingly, he liked what he saw. Outside, the first stars began to appear in the Beverly Hills sky, and the sound of the folk music that Ms. Smith had put on the speaker mixed with the distant noise of traffic. The celebration was about to begin, but Edward knew something much bigger was happening. His family was finally coming together. The July storm had left the Mendoza family mansion without power for 2 consecutive days, and for the first time in decades, the family experienced what it meant to live without the technology that had always surrounded them. It was the third night without electricity when everything changed definitively. Camilla walked through the dark hallways carrying Nicholas, now 4 months old, who had been crying inconsolably since the power went out. The emergency generators had burned out on the first night of the storm, and the maintenance company couldn't reach Beverly Hills due to the flooded streets. "He won't stop crying," she said to Ms. Smith, who was climbing the stairs carrying lavender candles she had made herself. "I've tried everything. Baby bottle, diaper, rocking. Nothing works." The groundskeeper from Kentucky observed the baby in the candlelight. Nicholas was clearly agitated, his tiny fists clenched, his face red from crying. It was a different kind of cry, not from hunger or sleep, but from deep discomfort. "He's feeling the change," Miss Smith said, her calm voice contrasting with Camilla's anxiety. "Babies are very sensitive to their environment. Without the constant noise of the air conditioning, the appliances, he's hearing things he's never heard before." "What kind of things?" "Silence, the wind, his own breathing." Miss Smith extended her arms. "Let me try something." In the master bedroom, illuminated only by the lavender candles, Miss Smith sat in the nursing chair that Camilla used. With precise movements that came back naturally after months of practice, she began to gently massage Nicholas's tummy, softly humming a folk song that her grandma had taught her. "Boy, boy, boy da cara preta, pega essa menina que tem medo de careta." To Camilla's surprise, Nicholas began to calm down almost immediately. His fists opened, his breathing became more regular, and within minutes he was sound asleep. "How do you do that?" Camilla whispered, sitting on the floor beside the chair. "It's not me. It's what my grandma called return to roots." Ms. Smith continued to gently rock the baby. "When you take away all the technology, everything becomes simpler. The body remembers what it always knew." At that moment, Edward appeared in the doorway of the room, carrying an oil lamp he had found in the attic. He was wearing only a t-shirt and shorts, without the jacket and tie that were practically a second skin. "Did you manage to calm him?" he asked quietly. "Miss Smith did," Camilla replied. "As always." Edward sat on the edge of the bed, watching the scene in the golden light of the candles. There was something deeply primal and comforting about that moment. A family gathered around a baby, protected only by the light of fire and ancestral knowledge. "Ms. Smith," he said after a few minutes, "can I ask you a question I've been thinking about for weeks?" "Of course, Mr. Edward." "Why did you never tell us you knew these things? In 25 years working here." Ms. Smith sighed, continuing to rock Nicholas. "Because I learned that rich people don't want to know what poor people know. They want us to serve coffee, clean the house, take care of the children, but they don't want to hear our wisdom. But that's—" Edward stopped, realizing he had no way to finish the sentence without admitting an uncomfortable truth. "Is it prejudice?" Ms. Smith smiled sadly. "Yes, Mr. Edward. And I also had prejudice. I thought what I knew was worth nothing compared to the degrees hung on the wall of her office." The silence that followed was broken by a knock on the door. Rose appeared, carrying a tray with chamomile tea and cookies. "I thought you might like something warm," she said, placing the tray on a side table. "And I have something to share. She sat in a nearby chair, her hands nervously smoothing her uniform. "In the past few weeks, I've been exchanging letters with people from the town where Irma was born, in Kentucky. I wanted to write a book about popular traditions." Everyone looked at her in surprise. "I discovered amazing things," Rose continued, now more confident. "Ms. Ruth, Irma's grandma, was known throughout the region. She saved hundreds of children throughout her life. And Irma—" She looked directly at the caregiver. "Irma was considered her natural successor. Everyone in the town expected her to continue the work. But I came to Los Angeles," Irma said softly. "Why did you come?" Camilla asked. Irma was silent for a long moment, just rocking Nicholas, who was sleeping peacefully. "Because I thought it would be better for my children, that they would have opportunities I never had." Her tears shimmered in the candlelight, "But in doing so, I abandoned who I was. I abandoned what I knew." "You didn't abandon," Edward said, surprising everyone with the firmness of his voice. "You preserved, and when it was needed, you used it." Rose leaned forward. "Irma, the people from your town found out about Nicholas, about how you saved him. They are proud. They say you honored Ms. Ruth's name." "And there's more," Rose added, pulling a letter from her pocket. "The mayor of your town wants to create a traditional medicine center in partnership with the public health system, and he wants you to be the coordinator." The proposal hung in the air, like the scent of lavender from the candles. Irma looked at Nicholas, then at Camilla, then at Edward. I don't know. 25 years here? 25 years, preparing for this moment," Camilla said, gently touching Irma's hand. "You saved my son, but maybe you can save many other children." Edward stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the storm had passed, and the first lights of the city began to flicker in the distance. But inside, in the candlelight, he realized that something much more important was being illuminated. "If you decide to go," he finally said, without turning around, "you will have all our support, financial, political, personal. It's the least we can do." "And there's one more thing," Camilla added, her voice heavy with emotion. "I want to go with you. I want to meet my biological mother, learn about my roots, and I want Nicholas to grow up knowing where he really comes from." Irma looked at the baby in her arms, who slept with the tranquility of someone who was exactly where he needed to be. For the first time in decades, she was no longer the invisible caregiver. She was a recognized healer, a bridge between worlds, a woman who could choose her own destiny. "I'll think about it," she finally said. "But if I really go, I want to come back here from time to time, to see how Nicholas is growing." "You will always be welcome," Edward said, and everyone knew he truly meant it. Outside, the power suddenly returned, illuminating the mansion and bringing all the electronic devices back to life with a chorus of beeps and hums. But no one moved to extinguish the candles or turn on the air conditioning. Some things, they discovered, were better in the simplicity of natural light. It was December 31st, 2025, and the Mendoza mansion buzzed with an energy that had nothing to do with the traditional New Year's celebrations of previous years. There were no golden decorations imported from France, no Dom Pérignon champagne, no evening gowns. Instead, Irma had transformed the entire house into a celebration that blended the traditions of the Kentucky countryside with the understated glamour of Beverly Hills. Nicholas, now almost 10 months old, crawled across the Carrara marble hallways, his laughter echoing off the walls that once only knew whispered conversations and political dealings. He had become a robust and curious child, his dark eyes always shining with intelligence, as if he carried within him all the ancestral wisdom that had brought him back to life. Irma was in the kitchen, overseeing the preparations for the New Year's feast, but she was no longer the silent caregiver of old. She wore an embroidered white blouse that she had received as a gift from her biological mother, whom she had met 3 months earlier on an emotional trip to Mississippi, and her grey hair was loose, framing a face that radiated serene confidence. "Is the French toast ready?" asked Dr. Francesca, who had come down from the annex to help with the preparations. The 78-year-old Italian moved with more agility lately, as if having a purpose in life had returned her youth. "Perfect, Grandma," Irma replied with a smile, using the Italian word Francesca had taught her. "And the rosemary is giving off the aroma that Nicholas likes." It was true. In recent months, everyone had noticed how Nicholas reacted positively to the scents of the herbs that Irma used. Dr. Robert, who now visited the family monthly to monitor the baby's development, was documenting everything for his research on integrative medicine. "Irma," called Camilla, entering the kitchen carrying a small suitcase. "Rose, finish packing your things. The flight to Union is at 11 in the morning." The decision had been made the previous week after months of planning. Irma would take on the coordination of the Traditional Medicine Center of Union, her hometown in Kentucky, in an unprecedented partnership between the Ministry of Health and an international NGO that funded integrative medicine projects in developing countries. "And are you sure you want to go with her?" Irma looked at Camilla, who had completely transformed in recent months. She was no longer the insecure former model Irma had known years before, but a determined woman, connected to her roots, who had found her purpose, true identity. "Absolutely," replied Camilla, picking up Nicholas in her arms. "I want my son to grow up knowing his 2 grandmothers, the one who raised him and the one who healed him." Edward appeared at the kitchen door, wearing a white linen shirt and jeans, a combination unthinkable during the times when his political image was his main concern. He had announced the previous month that he would not run for re-election, preferring to dedicate himself to the foundation he had created to promote integrative medicine in the United States. "The helicopter is confirmed for tomorrow," he said, checking his phone. "Doctor, Robert is coming with us to oversee the installation of the equipment at the medical center." The doorbell rang, and Rose went to answer it. She returned a few minutes later, accompanied by an unexpected visitor, Dr. Henry, carrying a bottle of champagne and a gift wrapped in golden paper. "I couldn't let you leave without a proper farewell," he said, greeting everyone with warm hugs, "and without delivering this personally." He handed the gift to Irma, who opened it carefully. It was a bronze plaque engraved, "Ms. Irma Smith, Specialist in Integrative Traditional Medicine, Beverly Hills Hospital, 2025. "Doctor?" Irma was left speechless, holding the plaque against her chest. "It's official," said Dr. Henry. "The medical board has approved the new integrative medicine protocol. You have been recognized as the first specialist in traditional techniques in the state of Kentucky." The silence that followed was broken by Nicholas, who clapped his hands as if he understood the importance of the moment. Everyone laughed, and the emotional tension dissolved into pure joy. "There's one more thing," Dr. Henry added, pulling a document from the folder he was carrying. "The Federal University of Kentucky wants to create a chair in traditional American medicine, and they want you to be the first professor." "But I haven't even finished high school," protested Irma. "It doesn't matter," Edward said with a smile. "Knowledge doesn't come only from books, and what you know saved my son and will save many others." At that moment, Mr. James appeared at the kitchen door, shy as always, carrying a small plant seedling in a clay pot. "Ms. Irma," he said in his calm voice, "I wanted to give this to you before the trip." It was a seedling of maracuja oil, the tree from which Irma had used the oil to massage Nicholas during the critical early days. "Mr. James," Irma gently touched the leaves of the seedling. "How did you manage this?" "My sister sent it from Georgia. She said every healer needs to plant their own healing tree." Edward watched the scene, his former caretaker being revered as a wise woman, receiving gifts that represented recognition and respect, and felt a mix of pride and shame. Pride for what Irma had achieved, shame for the years he had treated her as invisible. "Irma," he said, calling everyone's attention, "I have a confession to make." Everyone turned to him. "When you started working here 25 years ago, I thought I was hiring just a maid. But in fact," his voice faltered for a moment, "in fact, I was bringing an angel into my home. And I wasn't smart enough to realize that until I almost lost my son." Camilla approached her husband and held his hand. "None of us were smart enough, but we learned." At 11 o'clock at night, everyone gathered on the back porch where Irma had set up a simple table with the New Year's Eve dinner. There was no ostentation, just good food and people who cared for each other. Nicholas slept peacefully in his stroller, surrounded by the aroma of lavender candles that had now become part of the home's routine. "Before midnight," Irma said, standing up, "I want to say something." Everyone looked at her attentively. "I spent 25 years thinking I had abandoned my true calling to work as a domestic worker, but now I realize that everything was part of a bigger plan. I needed to be here, in this home, so that when the time came to save Nicholas, I would be in the right place." She looked at each of those present: Edward, Camilla, Rose, Francis, Dr. Henry, Mr. James. "You have taught me that wisdom has no social class, that healing has no color, and that family is not just blood. It is also who we choose to love and protect." The fireworks began to explode over Central Park, lighting up the New York sky with colors that reflected in the tears of emotion of everyone present. "For the coming year," Edward said, raising his glass, "may we continue to build bridges between worlds that have always been closer than we imagined. Cheers!" Everyone toasted together, and when midnight arrived, with the church bells ringing in unison with the sound of the fireworks, Nicholas briefly woke up, looked around at all those people who loved him, smiled as if blessing the moment, and went back to sleep peacefully. The next morning, as they prepared to leave for Kentucky, Irma gave Nicholas one last massage. Not because he needed it, he was perfectly healthy, but because they had both gotten used to that ritual of affection and connection. "See you later, my little healer," she whispered, kissing the baby's forehead. "You taught me that it's never too late to meet who we really are." The plane took off at 2 in the afternoon, taking Irma back home after 25 years. But this time, she was not running away from who she was. She was running with open arms to embrace her destiny, and in the Beverly Hills mansion, which now also served as the headquarters of the Nicholas Edward Foundation for Integrative Medicine, the aroma of rosemary still perfumed the hallways, reminding everyone that some healings begin with the right hands, in the right heart, at the right time. Here, and leave your opinion about this story, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the final screen for you. It's very exciting.